Welcome everyone to the simple transition to ForeFlight from JeppFD. We're really excited to help your organization and your pilots get introduced to and become more familiar with ForeFlight. As you're likely aware, Jeppesen Mobile FliteDeck is being sunset on the 25th of January 2024. That's when the 2401 AIRAC chart cycle becomes effective. That means updated charts and data will not be delivered for the 2402 AIRAC chart cycle and beyond, so JeppFD will only provide expired charts and data after late January. I want to mention a discount we're offering to general aviation and business operations who have not switched over to ForeFlight Mobile from JeppFD yet. If you've used Jeppesen Mobile FliteDeck in the last 3 months and you do not have an active ForeFlight subscription, if you sign up this month, we're offering a 50% discount on all new ForeFlight subscriptions. If you purchase next month in December, we're offering 25% off, so don't wait to take advantage. To qualify, you'll have to fill out an eligibility form at the link listed here. We'll also send a link in an email that you'll get after today's webinar, and we'll post it in the chat window of today's webinar shortly. In addition, while today's webinar will focus on what pilots need to know about using ForeFlight Mobile, we've had several other webinars going into detail on the regulatory approval process to begin using ForeFlight. If your regulator requires that, we recommend you watch that webinar. It's called Getting Approved to Fly with ForeFlight. You can find the video at foreflight.com/webinars. In addition, we'll include a link to a document package to support you in seeking regulatory approval in that email that you'll get later today. And lastly, before we get started, I want to mention you can ask questions during today's webinar using the GoToWebinar message panel on the right side of your screen. We've got a team of people standing by to answer them, and we'll also take a few of the more popular questions during today's webinar and talk about them at the end. If you encounter any audio or other technical issues during today's webinar, I recommend leaving and rejoining the webinar. And if that doesn't work, try switching to a computer if you're using a mobile device. And lastly, we'll be posting the video of today's presentation at foreflight.com/webinars in the next 24 hours so you can share it with colleagues or any others that may benefit from it. With that, let me introduce our presenter for today. Thomas Daugherty is the product manager overseeing our customer education team here at ForeFlight. Thomas, take it away.
Hey, thanks for the introduction there, Jay. And welcome everyone to our ForeFlight presentation intended for those that are just making the transition away from Jeppesen Mobile FliteDeck onto ForeFlight EFB. The purpose of our webinar today is to walk you through the core functionality inside of ForeFlight Mobile to mimic what you've been doing in Jeppesen. This should serve to get you access to all of your Jeppesen charts, all of your terminal procedures, your enroute charts, your documents, anything that you've been relying on from Jepp, how we access that information here inside of ForeFlight. We're going to talk about a couple of extra features that you can add on to your ForeFlight platform, and a few additional tips and tricks just to start taking advantage of the additional situational awareness tools that are available to you inside of ForeFlight that you didn't previously have access to inside of JeppFD. So our agenda today, we're going to walk through navigating ForeFlight as an application, where the different features are laid out, how I get around from feature to feature. We're going to talk about how I get logged into ForeFlight with my new ForeFlight credentials for my login into the application itself, and then into my Jeppesen account so that I have access to all of the Jeppesen enroute and terminal procedures as part of my account. Once we have that logged in, we're going to take a look at our downloads view. This is where we go through and download all of our information for use offline in flight. This works a little bit differently inside of ForeFlight than it did in Mobile FliteDeck. And so we'll take a look at ensuring we have all of our downloads onto the application. We're going to go over and look at the Maps tab. This is where most of us will spend our time while flying around inside of the application, looking at our route and looking up information. So we'll spend a little bit of time there seeing how we view enroute charts, how we add a route together, all of those sorts of things. We'll also look at an additional way we can load routes into the Maps tab. We're going to move over and take a look at our terminal procedures, either through the Charts or the Plates tab. You'll see it as Plates tab on my end, but your application may say Charts tab. That's just one of the localization features we have inside of ForeFlight to make that a little more familiar. We're going to look at the Documents tab, where we can see things like our Jeppesen airway manuals. And then we're going to go through and look at a couple of extra tips and tricks, just some other features to start expanding your use of ForeFlight through all of the great situational awareness tools that we have available. The first thing we're going to look at here is, again, navigating around the application. ForeFlight is a very easy to navigate application. Things are laid out right along the bottom of the app. This is what we refer to as the tab bar. If I want to switch from different features, I just tap on the tab that I want. We can see that I am currently on the Maps tab, as that's what I have highlighted in white in my dark mode app right now. If I wanted to move from viewing some of my enroute procedures to, say, a terminal procedure, I would tap on the Plates, or again Charts, tab, and that would bring me over to the area where I can view those enroute procedures. We have a special kind of tab at the very end. This is called our More tab, and tapping on that opens up our More drawer. This is where all of the additional functionality that I have in the application that I can't currently view along the bottom of the tab bar all resides. You can see we have the application here in a landscape view and full screen on an iPad. So I have a fairly large amount of room along the bottom for a large number of tabs. If I were to switch this over to portrait view, or on a smaller device, say an iPhone, I would not have as much room for all of the tabs along the bottom. From right to left, they would start to fill into the More drawer, and this is where I would find any features that I may not have access to. There is one additional item here that we're going to look at, and that is how I check the current version. If I have the More drawer open, I have an About tab at the bottom. Tapping on this will open our About modal, where I can see the current version of the application along the top. As we can see here, the current version when this screenshot was taken was 15.3. The current version of ForeFlight is 15.10. So I would know that I was out of date and needed to update my version of ForeFlight to see all of the newest features available. Now that we are navigating around the app and we know what version of the app we have, let's talk about logging in. We have two different accounts that we need to log into. Our ForeFlight account, which is what gives us different features and functionalities inside of ForeFlight Mobile, and our Jeppesen account, which is where we can access all of our enroute and terminal Jeppesen procedures. With the More tab open, if I scroll down to the Account tab, tapping on that will open up our Account modal. Here, I can see that once I first download the app, I immediately start a ForeFlight trial. If I have not purchased a ForeFlight account, I may want to do so using some of the different links we have here. But ideally, going through our website so I can see all of the features and functionalities of each of the plans we have in ForeFlight, as there's a number of features that distinguish each of the different plans, and finding the correct one for you will make using ForeFlight much more enjoyable. If I've already purchased my account, I can tap on the Sign In button at the bottom of this modal. Here, I just have my email and password that I will have set up via a purchase confirmation email once I've purchased my account. Once I've signed into my ForeFlight account, I'll need to go through and sign into my Jeppesen account. Again, with the More tab open, right below the Account tab I see the Jeppesen tab option. Tapping on that will open up our Jeppesen modal. Here on my account, my Jeppesen login is managed via my business account, and so my business admin is who controls my login. If I'm on an individual account, instead here I will see a username and password field very similar to what we saw on the ForeFlight side. If that's the case, I'll want to go through and make sure I log into my account first so that I have access to the different coverages. Either way, once I have my username set up, I now need to link one of my Jeppesen coverage seats to my ForeFlight device. You can see here that I have no coverage currently installed on this device, so I will need to tap on the green Install Coverage button to see different options I have available. Dependent on what my Jeppesen account has and how it's set up, I may see one or multiple options that I can install on this device. Here we see multiple different Jeppesen coverage options, some associated with aircraft tail numbers, but all with a number of seats available that I can install onto this device. Installing one of these coverages will require one of the available seats that I have as part of my Jeppesen account. If I don't currently see any seats available for the coverage I need to install, I will need to unlink my coverage from either Jeppesen Mobile FliteDeck's application itself, either purchase an additional seat from Jeppesen, or unlink that from some other device or aircraft that is currently using it. If I do have available seats, I can tap on the green Install button next to the coverage that I want to have linked on this device, and that will install that coverage, allowing me to then download the Jeppesen charts, enroute and terminal charts for that account. Once I have those both linked, will allow me to get everything downloaded onto the application. ForeFlight is designed to be used offline in flight, and I want to make sure that I have all of the information I need to safely complete my flight saved onto the device. I do this once again with the More tab open, and at the very top, I have my Downloads button. We can see that both the More tab on the very bottom right corner and our Downloads button on the top of that menu both have a red badge icon on them with the number 9, letting me know that I have a number of downloads available that I need to look at. Tapping on that Downloads button opens up our download modal with a list of all of the different downloads I have available for my device. At the very top, I have a series of options. Here we see data settings and region settings. The data settings option will walk me through different types of data. This can be things like my IFR high, my IFR low, helicopter charts, taxi diagrams, different categories of data that I may want or not want on my device. My region settings allows me to go through and select different geographies that I want to have downloaded. This may be something like a US state, a country in Eurocontrol, or a Canadian province. Whatever I have selected is what will be downloaded every 28-day cycle. There are other ways that I can download things one-off if I have a trip into an area I don't normally fly into. But if I'm flying regularly across the same areas, I'll want to make sure that those are turned on in my region settings. I'll mention this again a little bit later, but these two settings do not have any impact on my Jeppesen downloads. The areas where we'll see our Jeppesen enroute and terminal charts, those are going to be controlled by whatever is on my Jeppesen account. So I can turn off whatever regions or data types I want in these settings, that's not going to impact my Jeppesen, my two main Jeppesen downloads that we have. Below those settings, I see a list of all of the available downloads. On an individual download itself, I can see the name of that download. In this case, is an airport or nav database that we have inside of ForeFlight. This is probably one of our more important downloads, as this is what contains all of the information about airport location and frequencies, nav aids, waypoint names, airways. Lots of important information is all included in this airport and nav database. Occasionally, due to a regulatory source or some other information, we have an update that needs to be made to some of that info. We'll always try and get that out to you as quickly as possible, and we'll note that that is a new database by including the date that it was updated in the parentheses. So we can see that this particular database was updated on August 10th. The active dates of the database or whatever download are shown beneath it. Most of the downloads are going to update on a 28-day cycle, so I'll see that date range here below. As we get close to that data cutover, we will go ahead and ship the next data cycle to your device ahead of time. So you'll have the ability to have both the current database and the future database on your device at the same time. Then, when it comes time for the data to cut over, ForeFlight will automatically handle that switchover on the appropriate date and time. So I don't have to go through and delete the old database or activate the new one. ForeFlight handles all of that for me automatically. If I want to either see the download size of an individual option or just download one option, I can always hit the blue download arrow along the right-hand side of the item I need to download. Below my required downloads is where I will see my Jeppesen chart downloads. These are split into my enroute and terminal charts. And again, these are not affected by what I have selected in my data or region settings above. These are controlled by what I have as part of my Jeppesen coverage that I've purchased through Jepp. So if I want to add more coverages, I can purchase additional coverages either through ForeFlight or Jeppesen, and that will be automatically included in, say, my enroute or my terminal charts. Down at the bottom, I have the total amount of downloads and download size for everything that I currently need, and that big blue download button over in the right-hand corner. Tapping on that will activate all the downloads. I'll see my progress bars and my green checkbox as I go through and have everything saved on my device. Once I have green check marks across the board, I have everything downloaded and ready to go. And we can see that the red badge icon on my More tab has now disappeared. If at any point I go through, I'm looking at weather or planning a flight, and I notice that that red badge icon is back, we highly recommend that you go through and verify what new downloads are available before you go offline to fly the aircraft. In this case, we see that we have an update to our business directory, which includes all of the information about different on-field service providers, fuel prices, phone numbers, things like that I may want if I need those services while I'm on the ground. Now that we have everything downloaded onto our app, let's take a look at the Maps tab and how we can interact with some of the different map elements to start doing some basic flight planning. I've moved over to the Map tab. I can see that's selected along the bottom of my tab bar. And in the upper left-hand corner, I have my layer selector. Currently, I have no layers selected, so I see the None option along the top. If I tap on that layer selector, I'll see two different columns with varying items dependent on what kind of coverage I have inside of ForeFlight. On the left, these are generally map or base layer options that I would use to view and navigate around. We see things like the or the US VFR sectionals, or the Canadian VNCs, or different IFR high and low charts. At the very top, we have 3 specific options that are a little bit different. This would be the ForeFlight aeronautical map, the Jeppesen IFR low, and the IFR high. These are all data-driven maps that allow me to zoom in to get more detail, zoom out to declutter, and tap to interact with different elements on the map. We'll look at some of those in details, but those are a little different than the other charts below. On the right-hand side, I have different map layers that I can toggle on top of those enroute charts. This may be something like our icing charts, or NOTAMs, or flight categories at different airports. Depending on my subscription in ForeFlight, I may see different options, both geographically as far as the charts, and what I have available for map overlays. For our purposes today, we're going to take a look at the Jeppesen IFR high chart, although any of our data-driven charts are going to operate the same. So I'll tap on Jeppesen IFR high to replace my standard base map with that more familiar looking Jeppesen enroute chart style. Just to the right of our layer selector is our flight plan button, or FPL button. Tapping on that will slide down a drawer from the top that allows me to do some basic flight planning information here. We can see along the left, I have the ability to select a specific aircraft, a specific performance profile for that aircraft, or altitude. On the right-hand side, I can select from different procedures available, even have an entire route planned for me, or set my ETD, something I always recommend doing as we're starting out planning for new flights, because that will affect what weather and forecast ForeFlight uses for things like headwinds or tailwinds. Right there in the center of the box, I see that it just says tap here to create a route. That's what we're going to go ahead and do. So we'll just tap into that box. ForeFlight will bring up the on-screen keyboard onto our device, and we can start typing different route elements we want into our flight plan. In this case, we're going to start with our departure airport, and we'll just put in Lima, Mike, Lima. As soon as I hit space, ForeFlight is going to analyze whatever I've typed in and see if it can recognize that as a waypoint, a nav aid, or an airport. In this case, it recognizes that as an airport and gives me that blue route bubble icon in my flight plan drawer. It also gives me a waypoint on the map labeled with the same thing. If I tap back into my flight plan drawer and type in another airport location, in this case, let's do Lima Sierra Zulu Hotel, when I hit space, ForeFlight again recognizes that as an airport, creates a route bubble icon for it, and then draws a line between my 2 waypoints. So you can see here by typing out different airports or waypoints, I could build out a route either as simple or as complicated as I needed to. If I need to interact with my route element, say either delete or remove one of my items from it, I can always tap on my specific route bubble icon, and that will bring up a quick actions menu for it. Here we see one of the ways in which ForeFlight's helping us stay situationally aware and ahead of the aircraft. My second airport icon, or airport route element there, had a little red badge icon on it. When I tap on it, I can see that there are alert NOTAMs for that airport, and I can access them quickly simply by tapping on the option that says View Alert NOTAMs. So this way I know that I have NOTAMs that probably are going to impact me at this airport, and I can view those very quickly. For our purposes today, we're just going to go ahead and use the Remove from Route along the very top. If I have a more complicated route that's got a lot of waypoints, a lot of nav aids, and I need to delete something out of the center of the route, this is probably the easiest way to do so. I can go in and tap on the specific route element I need to remove and just remove that out of my route. If I need to clear my entire route, say I'm done with that particular flight, I have my clear button in the bottom right-hand corner of that flight plan drawer that allows me to clear out all of my waypoints. If I need to close my flight plan drawer at any time, I can tap on the FPL button along the top, and that will close that drawer, giving me some more map and screen real estate here. On the upper right-hand side of the map view, this is one of the areas that I see our universal search tool. Tapping in here will bring up, again, our on-screen keyboard, and I can search for all sorts of things across both my map and my nav database, as well as the application itself. We'll see several different ways that we can implement this, but for our purposes today, we're going to look up a new airport. If I know the ICAO identifier of the airport, I can type that in and see that that is my top search result. So I've typed in Lima, Mike, Mike, Lima. I see that our top option is the matching airport, and highlighted in blue is the text that I'm actually matching on. If I don't know the airport identifier that I want to fly to, I can type in other information about the airport. Maybe a common name, the city that the airport is in, the country that the airport is in, any other information that I may have about it, and I can see that we also match on the same airport based on that information. So I can use this to help me find different areas, different airports that I may be less familiar with as I'm trying to do my flight planning. If I tap on any of the results from our search box, ForeFlight will show me their location on the map with this little green circle around it, and show me information about that point over on the right-hand side. This means that I can look up information about an airport or a waypoint or a nav aid without interfering with my route. So if I get asked questions by ATC or I want to do some contingency planning, I can use this as a tool to make sure that that's the area that I want. You can see along the top of this airport info panel on the right, I have things like direct to or add to route if I want to include those as part of my route. This search tool works the exact same way for things like a waypoint or nav aid. So here I can type in the name of a waypoint that I want to fly to, and I'll see its location, have the ability to fly direct to, or have the ability to add this to my route. There's another type of search that I can do inside of ForeFlight, and that's going to be by interacting with the map elements and the map itself. So I've just zoomed in a little bit here so that I can see information like nav aids or waypoints or airways at a little higher zoom level. If I tap on any of our map elements, in this case our nav aid, that will bring up the same search results box on the right-hand side that we saw when we searched for something by name. So here on this VOR DME, I see its name, its Morse code, its frequency, all sorts of information about this point without having to necessarily know its name or type it into my search box. If I don't see a map element visibly on the map, but I have a general idea of the area that I want to find a waypoint in or see what nav aids or airports are nearby, I can, instead of quickly tapping on the screen, I can press and hold on the screen. And when I do, this Add to Route search box will pop up. This is going to search for all sorts of information at the geographic location where I press and held. I can look at things like airspace, see the lat long, and the AGL actually at the very end of the lat long there, where we see 0 feet because we're out in the ocean here. That's actually the height AGL at that point, height MSL at that point. Super helpful for finding out ground elevation, different points around. Along the very bottom, I can filter these search options by things like airports, nav aids, or waypoints. So if I filter down into my waypoints, I can see the bearing or the distance I have from each of these waypoints to the location that I tapped, and I can see the same waypoint we were searching for earlier. Tap on the More option to the right of that waypoint, and now I have the ability to either direct to, add that to my route, or see the specific details view we saw earlier when we searched for it by name. So using these tools, I can do a little bit more visual flight planning if I need to add waypoints or things like that at a specific area. The last piece we're going to look at here as we're just interacting with the map is our map settings gear. There's an option to do a couple of the map settings without having to go into the More tab and go to settings at the top and see all of the available settings across ForeFlight. We have some quick setting options here at the very top just by tapping on that settings gear. The very top option we see is the ability to adjust our screen brightness. This allows us to adjust our device brightness depending on how, say, bright it is in the cabin for us. And I can actually go beyond the dimmest setting available on my device. About the last quarter or so of that screen brightness slider, ForeFlight will start to apply an opaque overlay on top of the screen to dim that down even further. So if I'm flying at night in a particularly dark cockpit, and the iPad's the brightest item in there, and it's kind of messing with my night vision, I can use that screen brightness slider to make the device even dimmer than the standard iPad settings. Below that, I see a series of Jeppesen defiltering options. I see these on the map right now because I happen to have my Jeppesen IFR high or IFR low charts selected. If I have other charts like the ForeFlight aeronautical chart or different options selected as my base map on the left side there, I may not see this Jeppesen quick filters option. I may see different options depending on what those base layers turned on are. Because we have Jeppesen open though, you can see that I can select my map theme. I can declutter things like airports, airways, or waypoints, whatever works for me on that particular flight. We do generally recommend leaving most of these on just for situational awareness so that I, always see all the airspace, all of the waypoints and airports around me. But if I need to declutter because I'm in a particularly busy area, these filters will allow me to quickly turn those on and off. Right below that, we see our auto center mode. I have 3 options to choose from here: north up, track up centered, and track up forward. North up is fairly self-explanatory, and we'll just keep north on the globe up as our aircraft own ship icon circles around, changes direction. If I have track up, the aircraft icon will stay pointed towards the top of my device, and the globe will rotate around underneath that. The difference between track up centered and track up forward: track up centered will keep my own ship location there in the center of the screen as I'm flying around, while track up forward will move that own ship icon down to the bottom third of the screen, showing me more information in front of my aircraft than behind my aircraft. I like this view just because it helps me stay a little bit more situationally aware. Again, I can stay that little bit extra ahead of the aircraft. I'm a little less worried about what's behind me while I'm flying. We do want to show one extra little kind of workflow here using an additional ForeFlight product called ForeFlight Dispatch. ForeFlight Dispatch is made for generally flight departments or operators with multiple aircraft that want to do some desktop-based planning, collaborative across multiple devices, maybe multiple aircraft in there. It's a great tool for those departments, and if it's something that you're interested in, please do reach out to us. As a pilot, If a flight is dispatched and released to me, it shows up here in my Flights tab. So there along the bottom, I've moved from map over to flights. Along the left-hand side, I see a list of all of the flight objects that have been released to me. Here we just see the one option. So this one flight plan that's been released to me. And then on the right-hand side, I can see all of the details about this flight. I can see its departure, destination, alternate, the aircraft we're flying. I can get my briefing, my nav log, all sorts of good information here. I can do planning like this by myself on the Flights tab by hitting the plus button along the very top. But this is also where I'll see those released dispatched flights. In the upper right-hand corner, I have our Send To button. Generally in ForeFlight, anywhere that I see that Send To button, I can take the information that I'm viewing right now and visualize it in a different way somewhere else in the application. So here I have a flight plan that I'm looking at on the Flights tab. But if I open up my Send To button, I can view that same flight plan across our Maps tab or across our Plates tab to view the enroute charts. We're going to send it over the Maps tab, and I'll be able to see all of my routes. I can see my waypoints, my airways, any procedures that I have here for a SID or a STAR. So it's very quick for me to take a flight that was planned in ForeFlight Dispatch and put it onto the map and start flying these more complicated routes. One additional nice thing is that I also receive an email about this flight information, so I can preview it ahead of time, know when my departure time is, get an understanding of what my route looks like, and I can even open that route directly from my email if that's sent to me from dispatch. So if you are a business operator that's interested in kind of collaborative flight planning and some of the more powerful tools we have available, please do reach out to us about ForeFlight Dispatch, as it can really streamline some of your flight operations. Now that we've done a little bit of flight planning and looked at some of the things on our en route side of flying, let's go ahead and look at some of our terminal side. So we're going to go look at our charts or plates tab and how we can visualize those procedures. I have a different route loaded up here now. This is just across in the US from Indianapolis to LAX, and I can see that I have both a SID and a STAR as part of my route. Those are those green route bubble icons I have in there, letting me know that those are both procedures. If I go over to my Plates tab, on the left-hand side, I have a list of all of the different flight binders that I have on my device. And on the right-hand side, I'll be able to see all of the individual procedures. Flight binders are a way for me to organize different sets of procedures, either around a particular mission or a particular flight, or I can just create a binder with all of my kind of favorite procedures in there, using that other binder option at the very bottom. Today, however, because we're on a single flight, we're going to use our Flight Binders tool. Tapping on that, ForeFlight's going to suggest different types of flight binders that I may be interested in based on what other activity I've been doing across the application. Here I can see that I have a route loaded onto the Maps tab that I may be interested and want to pull over into my flight binder. And that would be our Indianapolis to LAX run. If I had a flight on the Flights tab, that would work the same way. I would see my destination departure pair here and be able to bring that flight in from the Flights tab. If I just want to create a blank binder and load in whatever airport pair I want, I can tap on the blue Add Empty Binder at the very bottom. But for today's flight, I want to go ahead and use that same flight we were on the maps, so I'm going to tap on that and create a new flight binder based on my flight from Indianapolis to LAX. Information that I have loaded on that as part of that flight plan is automatically going to fill in some of the items here in my departure and arrival and airport diagrams. And then I'll be able to see my individual airport diagrams over on the right-hand side. If I want to see this a little bit more full screen, in the upper left-hand corner of our plate or charts view here, I'll see that close button. Tapping on that is going to collapse the list of flight binders we see along the left-hand side, and that'll give me a little bit more screen real estate. I can view this more full screen. For today's purposes, though, we're going to leave that open just so we have a view of where everything is on on this tab. Here we are looking at the airport diagram for Indianapolis. If I wanted to switch over to my departure procedure, all I would need to do was to tap on the departure procedure button we have just below airport, and that will switch me over to view the departure procedure we had previously selected as part of our Maps tab. If I want to switch either of my airports, either my departure or destination airport, I can simply tap on the airport name with that little down caret next to it. Tapping on that will allow me to select from airports that I have on the Airports tab, the Maps tab, recent airports that I've loaded in, or I can just search for a airport along the top and switch this over to any other airport that I have. So if I'm making a diversion or I just need to plan out a different route, I can easily switch these over. Here I am looking at my arrival procedure into LAX. But if I want to view other potential arrival procedures, because I'm already on this tab, or this section, if I tap on it again, I'll be able to view all of the different arrival charts that I have into this airport. I can see on the left-hand side of each of these procedures my green Jeppesen saved text. That lets me know that I have the Jeppesen chart for each of these procedures saved and downloaded onto my device for use offline. This is what we were doing earlier when we were downloading all of our charts. So I don't have to worry about not having access to one of these while I'm in flight. Next to the name or underneath the name of each of my procedures, I can also see the type of aircraft that this is intended for. So either a turboprop or piston, or in this case, a jet aircraft. That gives me a little bit of distinction between SIDs and stars that are designed for different altitudes, different speeds. If I want to add this procedure into my binder, I can simply tap on the radio button to the right of that procedure name. And now I've added both of these arrival procedures into my flight binder. If I don't need both of these arrival procedures and I want to remove a procedure from that binder, I simply tap on that radio button to the right of the procedure I no longer need, and now I've removed that from my binder. If I want to look at something like approaches into LAX, because I currently don't have anything in my approach section for LAX, when I tap on it, I automatically bring up a list of all of the procedures. So I don't have one to switch to, so I need to select something to fill in this section. It's not uncommon for us to maybe need to select several different approaches, as I kind of want to brief all of them, have an understanding of what's available, but I may not know what approach I'm actually going to be flying until we're much closer to the airport. I can see what the weather's doing. I can see what traffic is doing. In this case, I'm going to select the ILS localizer for all of my 2.4 and 2.5 runways, so I can get a sense if there's any notes or obstacles that I need to worry about. You can now see that I have 4 different approaches, and I'm viewing the first one into LAX. The nice thing about having all of these stacked up in a flight binder is there's a quick and easy way that I can switch in between all of the different terminal procedure plates that I have at an airport. And that's by taking 3 fingers and swiping from right to left along that chart view there. And that will allow me to switch between any of my procedures. So I can quickly go through, brief all 4 of these procedures, make sure there's no notes, make sure there's nothing of concern for me. And then if I kept swiping, it would actually take me all the way into my airport diagram. for LAX. So it'll even move in between the categories of terminal procedure. A couple of other things that I want to point out here. Notice at the very top, I see that there are 3 NOTAMs. We actually filter the NOTAMs list for this airport to those that would apply to this specific approach. So if I tap on that, I get a list of just the NOTAMs that apply for this approach. It's a little easier for me to parse that information and understand what affects me today. If I tap anywhere on the approach plate view itself, so I'm just going to tap in there. Notice how that kind of shrinks down a little bit, and I now have this new toolbar along the top. As part of that toolbar, I have a little pencil icon. We call this our annotation tool. You'll see it a couple of different places around the application. You see it here on the Plates tab. You also see it on the Maps tab. You can annotate on the map. Tapping on that annotation tool replaces that toolbar with a new annotations toolbar. And this allows me to go through and draw or mark on the approach procedure just like I would if I was still looking at a paper version. So I can adjust the opacity and the color and thickness of the line that I want to draw with. It makes it easier for me to go in and highlight information that might be important for me. In this case, we've got some frequency information, some waypoint, some minimums information, so that it's a little easier for me as I'm briefing this plate or I'm setting up for this procedure to remember what was important for me. So using that, just like we used to on paper, can help me stay again ahead of the aircraft. If I need to get rid of any of my annotations, I have my counterclockwise or clockwise arrows that will let me undo or redo any of the annotations that I've added onto the map, or I have my clear button that will let me go through and clear out all of the annotations that I have on this procedure. On the right-hand side of that toolbar, I again have that send to option. Because I'm looking at a Jeppesen procedure, and all of our Jeppesen procedures are geo-referenced, meaning that we understand where they are on the globe. I can see my own ship icon on this procedure chart. I can also take this and send it over to the map. So taking the same procedure and the same terminal chart that I'm looking at now, I can view that over on our Maps tab with all of my route information. So I see exactly where the route from our arrival procedure is going to intersect with this approach procedure. So I know how steep my turns are, what waypoints I share, how I'm going to set up for these different procedures into LAX. I can also turn additional layers like my radar or my traffic on, so I can have those situational awareness tools alongside my procedure to really have a great picture of what's going on while we're flying this approach. The next thing we're going to look at is the Documents tab and how I access some of the Jeppesen manuals that I'm used to seeing across different flights. Here in the Documents tab inside of ForeFlight, I have a fairly familiar view at this point. On the left-hand side, I have a list of different options that I can select from, different drives that would host different types of documents. And on the right-hand side, I have a list of those available documents. Here we are looking at the imported drive, and we can see that I've not imported any additional documents onto my device. At the very top, we have the ability to create a binder, just like we saw on the approach charts or plates, and I can combine documents from different sources. A little down from that, I see all of the drives that are available to me on this device from different sources as part of my account. The list that I'll see here is going to vary based on my ForeFlight account or my Jeppesen account. So if you don't see things like Europe, FAA, or NAV Canada, as you don't have those regions as part of your ForeFlight account. What we're interested today, though, is my Jeppesen account, as this is what's going to have all of my airway manuals. So I'll tap on my Jeppesen drive, and now on the right-hand side, I see a list of all of my Jepp airway manuals. In the upper right-hand corner, I see our large blue download arrow that allows me to select all of the devices in this drive. And once I download all of those, I see from our kind of generic cover icon to the actual cover of each of these documents. Once I have these documents selected in my documents drive, so I've had them downloaded on here, I have the green check mark next to them, I've told ForeFlight that I care about these documents. So if there's an update to any of them, if any of them have a new revision published or anything like that, I'll actually have that handled on the downloads view that we first looked at, where we were looking at all of our enroute or terminal chart downloads. I'll have my documents added into that list, so I don't have to go back and forth between two different tabs to make sure that those are kept up to date. In the upper right-hand corner, we have our search tool. Just like we saw on the Maps tab, this is going to allow me to search for different things. So here I can search for airway and see all of the airway manuals that are available to me on inside of my Jeppesen drive. I can actually search for these on the Maps tab as well. The search box works the same. We're just looking at it here on the Documents tab. Once I see the document that I'm interested in this case, we're going to look at the airway manual for Europe. Tapping on that brings me directly into my airway manual. I can swipe from right to left on the individual document pages themselves to switch pages. I also have the exploded view of the documents along the bottom, and I can scrub through the documents there along the bottom to see, different pages, look for the sections I'm looking for. But in a 1,700-page document, that may not be the most effective way for me to find what I'm looking for. So I may want to use the hourglass, that's our condensed little search option along the top, to search for things within this document itself. When I tap onto that in a document, it looks a little bit different. I can still use the search option on the left of that toolbar to go through and just do a keyword search inside of this document. Look for a specific thing. But I also have access to a table of contents and a series of bookmarks. So using the table of contents, if I don't know exactly what I'm looking for or exactly what it's called inside of this document, I can filter down through those carrots and options to see specific things like danger area crossings as I need to. And that makes it a little bit easier to find specific pages. In this case, we're going to look at the airport information for Malta again. Once I've found the page that I'm interested in, I'm going to tap on the ribbon button just to the right of that search hourglass or spyglass, and I'm going to give this a bookmark title. We can see in gray that ForeFlight is suggesting a name. So I can just hit add bookmark and ForeFlight will use that suggested name, or I can type in anything that makes sense to me. So whatever is going to make it easier for me to remember what data is on what page, that's what I'm going to want to use as a bookmark. Once I have a page bookmarked, when I look at my spyglass icon there again, I'll now go over to the bookmark section and see any of the pages that I have referenced. So I can quickly swap back and forth between those different bookmarks, and I don't need to search for it every time that I'm looking for different information, in this case about airports. All right. And that covers most of the features and functionalities that we have access to in Mobile FliteDeck. We've looked at all of our enroute and terminal charts, looked at our documents, seen some of the different airport information that we have. So now we're going to go through and look at a couple of additional tips and tricks that we have. Some of this is you may have in Mobile FliteDeck, but we're going to continue to build out the situational awareness, use more tools inside of ForeFlight. The first thing we're going to look at here is Airspace Notes and crossings. There's a couple of different ways we can look up this information. If I want to look up airspace information for any piece of airspace, here we're going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to press and hold along my route, just off to the side, into a piece of airspace that I'm interested in, and I bring up that same Add to Route search box. On the right-hand side, I can see all of the airspace in that area. So we can see all of my FISs, FRAs, FIRs, all the altitudes associated with them, any of the information that may be applicable for me. And if I tap the Details button on the right of the airspace I'm interested in, I'll bring up all of the additional details, including things like my communication or cruise tables and any operational notes for that piece of airspace. Notice I've also highlighted that airspace lateral extents on the map view itself, so I understand a little bit better where that interacts with my route. More recently, though, inside of ForeFlight, we now have a series of these little route numbers along my route, letting me know of all of the airspace I'm flying through that has an airspace note associated with it. So I don't have to go through and look at every piece of airspace I fly through to see if it has an operational note. I can simply tap on the number that I want to look at. ForeFlight will take me directly into the operational note section and again highlight the lateral extents in green. So that makes it a little easier for me to understand airspace as I fly through. But I can also search for airspace that's off route if I'm interested in doing some diversion planning or anything like that. I also want to point out that ForeFlight has the ability to alert me as I'm flying into different types of airspace. So here we can see as I'm getting ready to fly into an FRA, I have the ability to see its altitudes, how far away I am from it. I'll get these alerts. So if I've been keeping up with my operational notes, my communication details, this can kind of help me do some planning as I fly between different pieces of airspace. Another tool we want to look at is our airport 3D preview. Very helpful when we're flying into less familiar airports, as we can get a bit of a qualification idea, a little qualification program document to understand what are my obstacles, what my traffic looks like, what the runway picture is going to look like as I go into land or break out on an approach. This is available on our Performance Plus plans, so you do need at least that tier available inside of ForeFlight. That's our top civilian plan is our Performance Plus, so you'll need at least that plan to get our 3D tools. I have a little bit of a longer route in here where we're going from France down to Dubai. If I want to look up an airport along my route, I could zoom all the way in and see the airport icon at my destination, but because I already have my flight plan drawer open with a route bubble icon for that airport, tapping on that allows me to see the details for that airport simply by tapping on the Show on Maps button along the very top. Now I automatically zoom in, I see its location on the map, I can see its airport info for frequencies, weather, runways, anything like that. So it's just a helpful way to gather that information quickly. Along the top area of that airport info pan, I have a 3D view button. Tapping on that brings up a new modal where we've taken our satellite aerial imagery and overlaid that with high-resolution terrain data to show you a different view of the airport. So here we can see obstacles, the runway. I get a good picture of what the area around the airport looks like. I can see if there's any terrain in the area. I can also turn on layers for traffic, so I can see what different aircraft that are landing at this airport are doing, get a sense for what traffic flow looks like. And even using the sun and the moon icons along the bottom right-hand corner, I can switch from day to night and see accurate lighting for things like my approach lights or runway lights at an airport. Very helpful as I'm kind of building up a mental picture of an airport that I've never flown to. Again, on the airport side, it's also helpful to know our airport service providers and what they offer at each field. Here I'm looking at my departure airport out of Paris. I brought this up doing the same thing we did just a moment ago on our destination, just tapping on the route bubble icon and show on map. And to the right of that same button where we just looked at 3D view, I have another button that says FBOs or fixed based operators. And this allows me to see a list of all of the airport services that I have. I can see things like maintenance shops or flight schools, or in this case, service providers, fuel providers on the ground. I have contact information, both phone number and frequency where available for any of these providers. And if I tap on the details button, I can get additional information. Things like fuel price, what services, do they have a fuel car, or do they have a courtesy car? What fuel cards do they offer? I can see comments, fee information where available. I can also see their phone number, their email, and driving directions to their location, which I find helpful if I'm dealing with folks that need to meet me at the airport that may not be super familiar with where the general aviation side of a terminal may be. They don't need to drive over to the commercial side to get picked up in an aircraft. All right. We're going to put a bunch of these tools together and introduce a couple of new ones here in a quick little in-flight diversion scenario. This is not the only way that we can plan through something like this, but this gives you a few of the different tools to add to your toolkit to see how you can work through an otherwise very high workload event. Here we have the same route that we were looking at earlier, and a little bit after our departure procedure. For whatever reason, we've decided that we need to make a diversion. We've decided on Munich as the airport that we're going to divert to, as looking at things like our airport tab or other information, that's going to work out well for us today. So we need to clear out our current route and get planned on how we're going to fly into Munich. In my search box in the upper right-hand corner, I'm going to tap in and then type the letter D or Delta space the airport that I want to fly to. In this case, Echo Delta Delta Mike. When I put in Delta space, D space, into my search box or into my flight plan drawer for that matter, that's going to go ahead and put my current lat long based on my device's GPS as part of my route. This allows me to do a pretty quick direct to any of the items that I want to type in. So you can see along the very top, I now have a route search option. I can put other things in here if I wanted to. That's going to take me from my current location into Munich. I can see how far of a flight that is and add that to my map by simply tapping on it. It replaces my current route and gives me my new route. I don't, however, think that we're going to be able to just fly directly into Munich. ATC is probably going to want us to follow some kind of procedures. So we're going to use our Procedure Advisor tool to see what's available and plan for what arrival procedure and approach procedure is going to work best for today's flight. Tapping on my Procedure button brings up our Procedure Advisor modal, where I can select from the different types of procedures into an airport. In this case, we're going to start by looking at our arrival procedures into Munich. Tapping on that will show me all of the procedures, as well as on the right-hand side in the map, showing me kind of this spider web of all of the different procedure routes. This may not show me which route is exactly best for me on today's flight, but I find this makes it much easier for me to eliminate procedures that definitely won't work because they're on the opposite side of the airport. They go nowhere near my route. So I use this to narrow down a list of acceptable procedures so that I can tap on them, start briefing them, and find a procedure that works best. Because I have my Jeppesen account linked and I can see my geo-referenced arrival procedures, right on the map, I can see my route. I see the procedure chart. I can see any notes, any restrictions on this particular procedure, and it makes it much easier for me to brief and verify that this is going to be the correct arrival procedure for us to use today. I can add that to my route and reopen my procedure advisor. In this case, we're going to select our approach option. You'll occasionally see this best wind flag along all of my approaches. There's a couple of different scenarios that I can get this in. I need to have some kind of current weather information about my airport. And so that can be something like here in the US, I may have an ADS-B receiver bringing in live weather updates for airports, or I may have departed recently enough so that the information that I had packed from my flight was going to be still applicable at these airports along my route. So if I see that best wind flag, I can actually see the METAR that this was derived from at the very bottom of this list. But that's where that flag is coming from, is because I have reasonably current weather for this procedure. Tapping on a procedure that works, in this case off of my best winds, I see all of the different initial approach fixes that I can use to how they line up with my arrival procedure, how they line up with the rest of my route. So I can pick one that's going to be the easiest for us to fly, the least amount of steep turns that we need to make as we go through. Once I select an initial approach fix that I want to use, below that, on our Performance Plus plans, you see some information about our augmented procedures list. So here I can select the aircraft category that I'm flying today, the equipment status of the airport itself, and the type of approach minimums I want to fly. Here we see a Cat 2 ILS and a standard ILS. If I select one of those, I'll actually get a calculated minimum added to my waypoint altitudes that I see depicted on the side of my chart here. So you can see that our procedures, each of the waypoints has the correct altitude. Selecting those would also give me my calculated minimums based on those criteria. So very helpful if I'm particularly single pilot IFR and want to have that information added to my flight. Once I add that into my route, I now have my approach plate loaded up. I have both my arrival procedure and my approach procedure loaded in with my direct to route from my current location. So I can start to use this and then combine it with some of the other tools we saw to add other waypoints, bring up airport information, to start briefing things, to take what's usually a very high workload activity like planning out a diversion and make that a little bit simple for us to start briefing and looking at these procedures. With that, we'll wrap up our presentation and move on over to the QA portion. Jay, back to you.
Thanks, Thomas. Before we get into some of the questions that you've asked during today's webinar, I want to mention again we're offering a discount to general aviation and business operations who use Jeppesen Mobile FliteDeck and have not yet switched over to ForeFlight. If you sign up this month, you'll get 50% off your new ForeFlight subscriptions. And if you sign up in December next month, you'll still get 25% off. Now you have to fill out an eligibility form to qualify. You can visit foreflight.com/JeppFD-discount to fill it out. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll include that link and the other links mentioned during today's webinar in an email that you'll get later today. Now I'd like to mention some useful resources for you as well. First, you can find information about many of the steps that Thomas walked through today to get your ForeFlight account set up and running at foreflight.com/first-steps. Next, ForeFlight.com has a vast library of resources to help you while getting your account set up, in addition to answers to thousands of questions you may encounter when flying with ForeFlight. You can find that at support.foreflight.com. You can learn more about setting up a multi-pilot account with specific information for prior Jeppesen Mobile FliteDeck customers at foreflight.com/JeppFD-business. You can also register for more webinars and watch past ones at foreflight.com/webinars. We've got webinars covering everything from walking you through the process of setting up a business account to in-depth demonstrations of how to use ForeFlight Dispatch and many other useful features both for your pilots and the rest of your organization. On that page, you'll also find a recording of getting approved to fly with ForeFlight. That's the webinar I mentioned earlier today that we've hosted several times now. It's specifically for Jeppesen Mobile FliteDeck customers, and it helps walk you through the regulatory approval process of switching to ForeFlight and the steps you need to take. Lastly here, and this is an important one, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to our pilot support team at team@foreflight.com. With that, let's move on to some of your questions.
And thank you all so much for asking so many great questions today. The first one, before I hand it back to Thomas, I'll take this first one here. We've gotten several questions asking about JeppView specifically and viewing en-route charts on the web. Currently, JeppView is obviously still up and running, but there is a plan to sunset JeppView once the ability to view the same charts is available in ForeFlight on the web. So JeppView will not be sunset on the same timeline as Jeppesen Mobile FliteDeck necessarily, but it will be once ForeFlight on the web has that capability. So I hope that answers some of the questions we got about this. I know that it's been a popular topic in both this webinar and the one on focused on regulatory, the regulatory aspects of switching to ForeFlight. All right, Thomas, I'll go ahead and give you some of the questions here, and thanks for pulling up your iPad here. The first one I can actually kind of already see on your map. How do you, we got one question, how do you display the organized track systems within ForeFlight?
Yeah, organized tracks are obviously useful if you're going to be trying to fly North Atlantic or North Pacific routes in here. I will mention that this is a Performance Plus feature, so you do need to be on a Performance Plus subscription. I can check that here in my account. Currently, I am on a military flight bag subscription, but you'll need to be on that Performance Plus level or higher to be able to access those. Once I have that level, I'll come into my aeronautical map, make sure that's turned on, and then into my settings gear, just to the right of that selector. Scroll on down to my airways and waypoints layer here, and then I will be able to see my show organized track slider along the bottom. Turning that on will allow me to be able to see those tracks. I can filter by east or west. These will update as new tracks are issued, and I can always tap on them to find more information, like my TMIs or anything else I need for flying each of the tracks. So very helpful to have those on if I am doing any kind of oceanic crossings.
Definitely. Yeah, it's great to have that there. The next question I have is, how do I input a runway heading out for, say, maybe 15 miles to cater for a runway heading departure?
Yeah, this is a great one. This is something that we don't have an exact runway heading option, but we have several things that can help us go ahead and get a heading and a bearing DME sort of thing like that. The easiest way is, while I can put in just a standard airport or waypoint name in here, I can also add kind of this place bearing distance item for it. So to put that in, I'll put in the same identifier for our airport. I'm going to put in my slash, and for airports or waypoints, this is going to be a bearing. If I used a VOR for the same feature, it would use the actual radial for it. But if I wanted to put in my runway heading, and at Austin, that's going to be a 180. I'll come in and then put in my distance, say 15 miles, and that will put in a waypoint for me. Now, as I zoom in on the map, I can see that that is on the magnetic heading and not necessarily lined up with the exact runway here. But I have another feature turned on to kind of give me a sense of what my actual runway lines are there, and that's our extended center line feature. So I can go in and put my gear icon, and I can come down into my map overlays and turn on my extended center lines feature. This allows me to go through and put in a specific extended center line off of my runways, gives me an idea of where that waypoint is, where the headings of that runway are. And if I needed to kind of do some fine tuning, some adjustment here, because I wanted something a little bit more than just that bearing, I could simply rubber band my route by pressing and holding onto my route here using those extended center lines, using that distance marker that I've put out there to kind of refine my point as I go through, and adding a new waypoint location there. So if I need to be very specific about it, that's what I would do. If I just need something that gets me into the direction, I would use the bearing DME from usually my airport is going to be the easiest way.
Awesome, thank you. Next question we've got is, can you provide an update in order to have the chart progressive number in the front list? It used to be on the, it could be useful to read airport notes. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I actually was very glad this got asked, because when this came up in the chat, I had to ask about this as well. I was unfamiliar with the setting, so we all get to learn something in the webinar today. If I have my More tab open and come down to my Jeppesen view, this is where we saw our login earlier. I have a series of settings available to me inside of my Jepp modal here that allow me to do things like share my VFR themes, prioritize Jeppesen plates over any other government source of plates, or in this case, my show chart index numbers. If I have that setting turned on, now if I go to things like my airport, I can see that I have those numbers reflected here underneath any of my plates. So that will make it a little bit easier for me to understand the specific plate reference numbers, look for the plates that I'm looking for. That also happens on our plates tab. If I come into my approaches here, I can see those numbers reflected here as well in my selector. So makes it a little easier. I can find those reference numbers and pick the correct plate.
Great, thanks, Thomas. Last question here is, how do you give access as a Jeppesen account manager within, I guess, within ForeFlight? How do you assign Jeppesen charting coverages?
Yeah, so anyone who is a account admin inside of ForeFlight can adjust the Jeppesen account settings for that account. Anyone can be this. You just have to get set up as part of your account. So if you know who your account admin is, they can make you an admin. If you're unfamiliar with who that is, please do reach out to us. team@foreflight.com is the easiest way. That contact support team link at the very bottom here, and we can look up your account. We can see who the admin is, or we can work with you to get those settings adjusted. So that would be the easiest way to go through and adjust those Jeppesen settings. There's some controls in there for exactly who can install what coverages are available on different devices. If you're more interested in some of that, I would look onto our Jepp transition there website. I think that's our first one in there. And that will have a guide on the account admin side of things for Jeppesen. So you can set in those coverage options.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great resource, and got lots of other great resources here mentioned. Some of the questions that we talked about today too. On the second link, support.foreflight.com, you can find the pilot's guide to ForeFlight, as well as many other guides, including dispatch and other products that we have. So those are all really great resources. Thomas, I don't know if you've seen any questions in the last few minutes to wrap us up, or if we're good to go.
Yeah, I do want to point out one that I did see down in here that was asking about GPS jamming, flying in areas that have either planned GPS signals or some kind of outage in there. The GPS chip that is in your iPad is where a lot of us use for kind of standard own chip location and things like that. That single constellation, it just uses the US GPS constellation of satellites for that. But our Sentry line of portable GPS and ADS-B receivers is a multi-constellation GPS receiver. That actually makes it jam resistant, because if one of the constellations is being jammed for a planned outage or anything like that, it will simply switch over to one of the other devices, the other constellations. So if you are flying in areas where that happens to you a lot, I highly recommend looking at the Sentry line of ADS-B receivers for us, as that can solve that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I've heard from people on multiple continents that has really helped being able to have the multi-constellation support there. Well, I want to thank everyone so much for coming today. Thomas, thank you so much for a great in-depth presentation. I know I mentioned earlier we have that we have had a separate webinar focused on the regulatory aspects of switching to ForeFlight. We have that webinar coming up again at this same time. Coming up on the 29th of November. So if that's of interest to you, you can sign up for that at foreflight.com/webinars. If you got an email about today's webinar to sign up for it, you'll also get an email about that here probably next week, just as a reminder that you can sign up. So with that, I want to thank you all so much for coming today, and we'll see you on the next webinar.